I have never viewed myself as perfect, nor would I ever want to be, nor would I ever request that of my clients or my family. My ability to laugh at myself and to feel easy about mistakes that I make helps bolster my credibility as an authentic speaker.
People, are you ready? Let's start the show. Let's start the show.
It is time, Lucinda, to let it shine. How are you doing today?
I'm fabulous, man, even though we need to be wind warriors today with all of this blusteriness going on in the Northwest. We have sunshine, and I'm feeling energized, and I'm happy to see your face.
Well, good to see you as well, and I really like this topic. It hit home to me personally, and I think it brings a lot of value to others. It's the power of vulnerability, and I heard a TED Talk recently, and the lady who was speaking said, vulnerability is the birthplace of joy, belonging, and love.
Woo!
A necessary
Yes.
expression.
Yes, that's right. Were you listening to Ms. Brown? She's a researcher, storyteller.
That's the same exact one.
Yeah, she's good.
Very good.
Yeah, she's great. And it's always nice to have all that research back up what we already know.
Yes.
Right? You know, people make decisions 80% based on story, 20% based on facts. So I love it when real scientists come out and back up what we know to be truth.
And so vulnerability is key even in, across the board in a person's presentation, communication skills. Almost could it be considered the foundation of being an effective communicator?
Well, I think in all cases it's about connection, right? And if we are closed, then it is much more difficult to connect with another individual or an audience. And for so long, people viewed vulnerability as a negative, meaning you're open to harm or attack. But the key word there is open. And the more open you are, then the greater the rewards are. So if you play in a giant sandbox, yes, the challenges are going to be giant, but the rewards are going to be even more giant. So vulnerability is really about opening yourself up and sharing your full, whole self.
Well, there's got to be some things that might be considered off limits in this vulnerability in front of other people. What would you say are some kind of stay away from that necessary topic, or you don't want to get too personal, or can you get personal?
Sure, I think that you can always be personal with human beings. You have to make judgment calls based on your audience. You have to choose your listeners just as wisely as you choose the words you want to speak, right? So you have to gauge their comfort level. You have to gauge their level of expertise and their own personal experience. And when you're going to share story, whether it's with a one-on-one conversation or with a large audience, the story needs to back up what it is you're trying to prove. So it goes back to our communication tenets of the art of the exhale, engaged listening, that focused messaging. So there's no reason to be completely personal about a story that has nothing to do with the facts you're trying to teach. So it's always a balance of how you're going to share your vulnerability.
How do you assess someone's vulnerability when, or assess what would be a vulnerable, when they're giving a presentation or they're going on stage? How do you assess what is okay to be vulnerable with?
Okay, so really we're talking about two different ideas.
Okay.
There is the idea of sharing personal stories to lend credibility and to lend context to whatever it is you're trying to teach, coach, or influence. And so you have to choose those personal stories wisely so that you remain focused, so that they are appropriate for your audience, and so that you are personally in a safe place. The idea of vulnerability is more about an exchange of information. It's about being authentic. It's about letting people feel your heartbeat, and it's about letting people feel what you're feeling. So a good example is I have the superpower to emote. I'm a big laugher. I'm a big crier. I'm intense when I want to be intense. So I have the ability to share all of those emotions with people. In my early years, I I am easily moved because I'm vulnerable and authentic with people. So people's stories move me. So AT&T commercials move me, or Hallmark movies move me, right? So when I was younger and I didn't know how to use that superpower so wisely, I would be overcome and I would be crying and trying to speak at the same time. So then it's like an ugly cry and no one can understand you, right? Because you're like, Dad, I really want you to know, yada, 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 right? Well, you can't even understand me. And
Yeah.
so I went to this great conference in LA in my early 20s, and it was an MC got up on the stage. She's a national anchor, and she said, "Now listen up, people. I am a crier." And I went, "Oh, there are more of us out there in the world?" And then the best piece of advice she said was, "When you start to cry, stop talking." And it's about using that authenticity, that ability to be vulnerable with people. They're going to feel you. Then the emotion washes over you. You use that silence. People can catch up with you and they get to feel it. And then you move on with your message. So vulnerability is about being open and letting whatever you feel transfer to other people. Now it works the opposite way too, right? I feel people's stuff. And so that can be very exhausting, and I do have to be very mindful of those situations so that I feel their stuff and then I'm able to compartmentalize it and move on to whatever it is I need to do.
So when you have a talk with someone who is about to do a speech or is about to do a presentation and you're helping them develop who they are, what are some things that you go over to help them or help discover what their vulnerability is? What makes them vulnerable versus somebody else? If they're not a crier, there's got to be some sort of seed that you find. How do you get there?
Well, it's about setting down fear, setting down your ego, and really being truthful about what it is you want to teach. Even if you're sharing statistics, be passionate about it. Get why it's important. If you understand why the information is important to you and you can then communicate why the information is important to someone else, then it's easier to be vulnerable. If you're just sharing information for the fact of sharing and you don't really get its importance, it's going to be harder for you to be authentic and vulnerable in the situation.
So it really has to do with the theme of whatever that talk is or your presentation.
Yeah, and it has to do with you believing what it is you're speaking and having an intentional reason for sharing and being willing to share. The more vulnerable you are, the greater the rewards. The more open you are to human connection, the greater your life, personal and professional.
There was a talk that I was a part of or witnessed in March as part of this sports team that I'm on, and one of the ladies who is between 55 and 59, it's an age group for athletics, and so that's why no one says how old they are. They say what age group they're in.
Right.
And she talked, and she's a world champion at triathlon in her age group and has been for years. And her talk, and she was very scared about doing this. She's very professional. She's a lawyer. She's very well educated, and you wouldn't know it because she's not a bragger. Anyways, in her talk, she talked about her struggle with anorexia or eating disorders growing up and how it was a constant challenge of never being thin enough and never being fast enough. And the talk was about 20 minutes long and the room was quiet.
Yeah.
And it was after that, everyone stood up, they applauded her, and you could tell that it was an area that it wasn't comfortable for her, but everyone had a feeling. Everyone had a different type of connection with her. And mine was, I was so proud of her to reveal that about her, and I felt closer to her. And the next day, we had her pictures taken, and I happened to sit right next to her. And I said, "Thank you for sharing." I was so moved by her courage to reveal that about herself, and that was just one example. It was appropriate for us because we were athletes, and a lot of us want to get better, and we find that, if you're lighter, you weigh less, you're faster. And so it was appropriate for our audience. But
Right.
I was very touched because she had the courage to do that. You have any examples of someone who has done that it kind of surprised you, or like, I had no idea that about you, and now I feel closer to you?
Oh my gosh. Well, any human that I am influenced by is because they're real and authentic. with me. They're able to share real information. They're able to open themselves up to me. We know that people who are intentional about being vulnerable, open to connections, you lead a fuller life, right? Your heart beats stronger. You have more love in your life. You have more passion in your life. You have more perceptions of success in your life. When you're open and vulnerable, you have a tendency to have more positive views. You know, my filter of the landscape is optimistic as opposed to someone with a negative view who is more closed off, because I'm super open to other human beings. But any good speaker that steps in front of one person or thousands, what makes them great is that ability to be vulnerable, because then they are truly authentic.
One of the quotes from the lady who in that TED Talk, she said, "Let go of who you think you should be and be who you are on stage."
Sure.
Because that perception of what you think other people think you should be, a very professional, stoic, deliver with great emphasis, and then you let that go and go, hey, this is who I am. You know, I'm not perfect. It's okay to be imperfect, because courage is about being imperfections,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and I would take that another step. I would define how you want to be perceived. Be your true self, but define what self it is you want to share with someone. You don't present based on how you think people want you to be. You present based on how you want to be perceived. And so that's about defining your behavior and defining the vocabulary words and defining for yourself what it means to be open. So yes, be your real self. Be courageous enough to be real. And along with that, define what that is for you. What is your real self? We have lots of selves, right?
Yeah.
At all moments of every day, we get to choose how we're going to be. We get to choose how we're going to respond. We can feel all kinds of ways, but we get to decide how we're going to respond to those feelings, right? And how we're going to share those feelings. And so be your true self, but be clear in your own mind and in your own practice how you want to be perceived. And then that is the person that you deliver. That's the presentation you deliver. That idea of imperfection and perfection, man, that's what makes life so fun. Perfection is, I have never viewed myself as perfect, nor would I ever want to be, nor would I ever request that of my clients or my family. My ability to laugh at myself and to feel easy about mistakes that I make helps bolster my credibility as an authentic speaker. I can think of one time when I was in the news business and I was interviewing a recruiter, and you know, I was pretty fit in those days, so I could do the pull-up challenges and the push-up challenges with this Marine. And then it came time they had a little booth set up, and it was like a computer test that you had to take and survey and all of that. And this is all on live TV. And it's just a temporary setup, but I didn't pay close enough attention to how it was constructed. And so I leaned on the shelf where all the computers were, and the entire thing came crashing down on live TV. Now, I could have gotten all bent out of shape and red-faced and sweaty and oh my gosh, how I'm going to fix this. And he could have done the same. But instead, I was the one in control, and I laughed, and I made sure he was safe. I stood us both back up, and I said, I guess we're going to have to handle some of those questions just manually. So why don't you give me a question, and I'll see if I can answer it. He gave me a question. I didn't know the answer, and then he didn't know the answer either. So not only did I wreck the physical system and the computer, now potentially I could have made that Marine look bad on TV, right? But instead, I handled it with humor, and I guided him back out of the conversation. I bring up this story because by the time I got back to the newsroom, there was a phone call waiting for me that I had made the Marine look bad, when in fact, everyone, like 10 to 1, talked about how the Marine and I respected each other and handled the situation so beautifully, because we were both able to laugh at ourselves and recognize we're not supposed to be perfect, even on live TV.
And that's what I'm drawn most to people, is when they show how imperfect they are, that they're human, they make mistakes. And for so many years, that was, I know, one of my goals unfortunately, in television news was to have the best delivery, to be perfect, to look right, to have my hair right, my suit had to be a certain way. And then after a while, it's like, why do I care so much? It doesn't really matter. I've got to be who I am instead of being this mold of somebody else.
Right.
And I know we're about a couple minutes away from wrapping this up. I have a meeting set up here pretty soon with a potential employer. And I was talking to my wife the other day. I said, what's so good about this person is they're new at this business and they don't know me necessarily. So they don't have this reputation. So when I come in, I can come in with who I am and not who they think I was. And it felt like this is a power position. This is my moment to dictate or let them know, here's Dave Erickson. Here's what you're going to get. Please don't use what someone else has said. Here's your chance to define me based on our interaction today.
Yes, and you have to be open, vulnerable, and courageous enough to bring your best, bold self. So being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean you're crying or emotional. My vulnerability means like I take up a lot of space. I use big hand movements. I'm not afraid to be super passionate and super expressive. I'm not afraid to be quiet and gentle with people. All of that is about being vulnerable. And as a presenter, that is the most positive feedback I get after still all these years that I've been speaking. That is still one of the number one survey responses I get is that Lucinda is so authentic and made me feel her message. That takes courage, but courage is much easier for me to carry than fear. All fear does is stop us from doing what we need to do. But courage, forward action, and man, when you're willing to be vulnerable in your relationships, your personal relationships, they are so much richer. If you can trust each other, trust yourself first enough to be vulnerable with that other human being, your interactions are going to be rich and real and supportive. And if they're not, then you're not with the right person. Right? If you can't be completely vulnerable and your best bold self with that person, then it's time to move on. And so that happens in the personal and the professional world.
Well, with that, we wrap up the power of vulnerability, Lucinda. Great one today, and thank you so much for sharing your insight to that and being
Thanks,
authentic.
Dave. Yeah, it's always such a great conversation, and man, we're just going to keep on letting it shine.
Absolutely. All right, we'll see you next week.
All right.
Don't let me hear you say life's taking you nowhere. Angel, look at that sky, life's begun. Nights are warm and the days are young.